Malik Weston had always been a devoted father. From the moment his daughter, Amara, was born, he'd made a silent vow to protect her from the hardships and prejudice he had experienced growing up. He and his wife, Jasmine, had worked tirelessly to create a stable, nurturing home. Moving to a diverse, progressive neighborhood had been a big part of that plan, a place where Amara could thrive without the constant weight of discrimination. When they enrolled her in Bionif Elementary, a prestigious school known for its inclusive values and high academic standards, they felt they'd finally found the right environment. The school conference evening had only reaffirmed their faith in Bionif Elementary. Amara's teacher, Mrs. Thompson, had been full of praise, highlighting Amara's academic achievements, her kindness, and her natural leadership. Malik and Jasmine had exchanged proud smiles as Mrs. Thompson recounted stories of Amara organizing study groups and helping her classmates. Every word confirmed that their daughter was in a supportive environment, a place where she could flourish. Then they were introduced to Susan Miller, Amara's new teacher, who would be taking over for Mrs. Thompson. Ms. Miller appeared warm and welcoming, exuding an aura of professionalism that immediately put Malik and Jasmine at ease. She spoke passionately about her teaching methods and her excitement to have Amara in her class. They left the meeting feeling assured that Amara was in good hands. However, on Amara's first day with Mrs. Miller, something felt off. It was a sunny Monday morning, and Malik watched his daughter as she prepared for her day with her usual enthusiasm. Dressed in her neatly pressed school uniform, Amara looked every bit the confident, curious girl they had always known. She chatted excitedly about the new science experiments and books her friend Jenny had told her they would start with Mrs. Miller. Her energy was infectious, and Malik couldn't help but smile as he watched her go on about her plans. "Did you pack everything, Princess?" Malik asked, ruffling her braids. "Yes, Daddy. Homework folder, math workbook, and the permission slip for the science museum trip. I'm ready," she replied with a wide grin. As the school bus approached, Jasmine gave Amara a quick kiss on the cheek. "Remember, sweetheart, if anything bothers you, you can always talk to us," Jasmine said, a habitual reminder out of motherly instinct. Amara nodded, waving to her parents as she boarded the bus, her excitement evident in every step. Malik and Jasmine stood arm in arm, watching the bus until it disappeared around the corner. "Do you remember how worried we were when we first moved here?" Malik asked, as they walked back into the house. Jasmine nodded, recalling the painful memories of their old neighborhood. "Yes, but we made the right choice. Look at her now, happy, thriving. We're finally in a place where she can be herself." The rest of the morning was peaceful, and they both enjoyed the quiet satisfaction of knowing they had made sacrifices for their daughter's future. However, their sense of security was about to be shattered. That afternoon, Malik prepared a special dinner to celebrate Amara's first day with Mrs. Miller. He grilled her favorite honey-glazed chicken, hoping to hear about all the exciting new things she'd experienced. But when the school bus finally pulled up, they saw a different version of their daughter stepping off. Instead of running towards them with her usual exuberance, Amara trudged up the driveway, her head down, shoulders hunched. She walked past them without a word, heading straight to her room, her backpack slipping off her shoulder and dragging across the floor. Malik and Jasmine exchanged concerned glances. "That's unlike her," Malik said, his brow furrowing. "She's probably overwhelmed," Jasmine suggested, though there was uncertainty in her voice. "First days can be a lot to handle." Malik nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He wanted to give her space, but as the minutes ticked by, his worry grew. After some time, he decided to check on her. Knocking gently, he entered her room to find Amara lying on her bed, clutching her favorite stuffed elephant, a sign she was seeking comfort, something she hadn't done in years. Malik's heart tightened as he sat beside her. "Hey, Princess," he said softly. "How was your first day with Mrs. Miller?" Amara hesitated, then turned away, her voice barely a whisper. "It was fine," "Daddy, just a lot." Malik exchanged a glance with Jasmine, who had joined him, both sensing their daughter's reluctance to talk. "If something's bothering you, you can always tell us," Jasmine offered gently, stroking Amara's hair. Amara tensed slightly at her mother's touch, but nodded, giving them a small smile. "I'm just tired. I think I'd want to be alone for a little while." Respecting her wishes, Malik and Jasmine left, their minds heavy with concern. As they prepared dinner, they tried to rationalize her behavior. Maybe she was just adjusting to the new teacher, the new expectations, they told themselves. But dinner only heightened their unease. Amara devoured her food with an intensity they had never seen before, almost as if she hadn't eaten all day. She finished her plate, then reached for seconds and thirds, each bite mechanical, her gaze fixed on her plate. Malik tried to make light of it, joking that she was eating like she'd been starving, but Amara only mumbled a non-committal reply, her eyes never meeting his. "Did you get to do any fun activities with Mrs. Miller?" Jasmine asked, trying to spark conversation. At the mention of her teacher, Amara's fork clattered against her plate, and for a brief moment, Malik saw fear flash in her eyes. She quickly recovered, mumbling that she was tired and asking to be excused. As they watched her walk away, Malik turned to Jasmine, his voice heavy with concern. "Something's wrong, Jas. This isn't just first-day nerves. Did you see how she reacted when you mentioned Mrs. Miller?" Jasmine began clearing the table, her hands shaking slightly. "Maybe we're overthinking this. She puts a lot of pressure on herself, and Mrs. Miller did seem kind." But Malik shook his head, unable to dismiss the nagging feeling in his gut. "This is different. Did you see how she ate? Like she hadn't had lunch. And that look in her eyes. It reminded me of how she used to act after the bullying back at her old school." They spent the rest of the evening in uneasy conversation, rehashing every detail of Amara's day, trying to make sense of it. When they finally went to check on her before going to bed, they found her fast asleep, clutching her stuffed elephant, her face troubled even in sleep. That night, Malik lay awake, his mind racing with worry. He remembered the time it had taken them to discover what Amara had gone through at her old school, the months of silent suffering she had endured before she finally confided in them. He had vowed then to never let her face something like that alone again. As dawn broke, Malik made a decision. He wasn't going to sit back and wait for Amara to tell them what was wrong. He was going to find out for himself. He would go to the school and observe, see if he could uncover anything unusual. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but he couldn't ignore his instincts. The next morning, he dressed early, telling Jasmine he would drive Amara to school himself, wanting to make sure she felt supported. Jasmine, touched by the gesture, smiled, thinking he was just being a thoughtful father. But Malik had no intention of simply dropping Amara off. After ensuring she was safely inside, he parked his car nearby, prepared to stay close and observe. He needed answers, and he would do whatever it took to protect his daughter from harm. Malik sat in his car outside Bionuff Elementary, watching parents and students stream through the gates as the morning bell rang. He felt a pang of guilt for spying, but his fatherly instincts urged him to stay. The memory of Amara's uncharacteristic behavior gnawed at him, making it impossible to ignore. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right in her new classroom, and he was determined to find out what it was, even if it meant bending a few rules. After a few minutes, Malik exited the car, adjusting his jacket and trying to blend in with the morning crowd of late-arriving parents. He strolled casually around the perimeter of the school, pretending to check his phone. Through a side window, he caught glimpses of classrooms filled with students, teachers bustling around, laughter, and the hum of morning activities. Everything looked normal, even idyllic. But as he made his way to the cafeteria, his heart rate quickened. The cafeteria was where he'd had his first suspicions. Amara's ravenous eating at dinner the previous night suggested she might have skipped lunch. Perhaps it was an isolated incident, But something about her haunted expression when he'd mentioned Mrs. Miller convinced him it wasn't. As he peeked through a side window, he saw a stream of students making their way into the lunchroom, chatting animatedly and lining up at the serving counter. Malik glanced around, noticing a side entrance to the cafeteria that opened into the school's back garden. Deciding to get a closer look, he quietly slipped inside and stood near the back, staying out of sight behind a column. From his hidden vantage point, he could see the entire room. Long tables filled with children, colorful trays of food, teachers watching over them. And there, near the far end of the room, was Mrs. Miller's class. Amara sat among her classmates, her shoulders hunched, her tray untouched in front of her. Malik's heart sank as he noticed her eyes darting nervously around, her posture tense. A few feet away, Mrs. Miller stood, hands clasped behind her back, her gaze cold and stern. The other children around Amara were laughing, eating their lunches, seemingly unaware of her discomfort. As Malik observed, he noticed Mrs. Miller's gaze shift toward Amara's tray. She walked over, leaning down close to Amara's ear. Malik couldn't hear what she was saying, but he saw Amara's face pale, her hands clenching tightly around her napkin. Whatever Mrs. Miller had said, it clearly had an effect on his daughter. Amara's face was pinched, her eyes focused intently on her tray, her expression a mix of fear and shame. A few moments later, Mrs. Miller straightened up, her expression unyielding as she continued to stand near Amara. The other students around them didn't seem to notice anything wrong, but Malik could tell that Amara was struggling to maintain her composure. She reached for her milk carton, her hands shaking slightly, and took a tentative sip, glancing anxiously at Mrs. Miller, who gave a slight nod of approval. Malik felt his hands tighten into fists. This was no ordinary teacher-student dynamic. The way Mrs. Miller loomed over Amara, her disapproving gaze never wavering, was not the behavior of a nurturing, supportive teacher. Malik's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Was Mrs. Miller punishing Amara in some way? But why? And how could she be so blatant about it, in full view of other children? Malik forced himself to stay calm, though every fiber of his being wanted to storm over and pull Amara out of that chair. He knew he needed more than just a hunch to confront the school administration, or Mrs. Miller directly. Deciding to wait a little longer, he continued watching as the children finished their lunches, some chatting and laughing, while others got up to dump their trays. As Amara rose to take her tray to the disposal area, Mrs. Miller intercepted her, blocking her path with a forced, almost saccharine smile. She leaned down again, her face close to Amara's, and said something that made Amara's shoulders sag even further. Malik strained to hear, catching only the faintest snippets of her words. Eating. Responsibility. Example. Amara nodded silently, a defeated look in her eyes, and set her tray down without another word. She joined the line of children heading back to the classroom, casting a final, longing glance at the food she'd barely touched. Malik's heart broke as he saw his daughter's expression, a mixture of shame, confusion, and quiet resignation. Whatever Mrs. Miller had said, it was clear she had managed to crush Amara's spirit in a way that was both subtle and painfully effective. Once the students filed out, Malik slipped out of the cafeteria, his mind racing. He returned to his car, sitting in silence as he tried to process what he'd just witnessed. Mrs. Miller's behavior seemed calculated, almost as if she were targeting Amara specifically. But why? Malik couldn't imagine what his daughter could have done to warrant such treatment. The Mrs. Miller he had met during the parent-teacher conference had seemed warm and professional. This was a different person, a manipulative, controlling figure whose actions left Amara feeling fearful and small. Malik knew he needed to confront the school about what he'd seen, but he wanted to hear Amara's side of the story first. When he picked her up that afternoon, he tried to remain calm, greeting her with a smile and asking about her day as casually as possible. "How was your day, princess?" he asked as she climbed into the car, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "It was okay," she replied, her voice flat. eyes focused on the dashboard. "Just okay." Malik probed gently. "You didn't eat much at lunch today. Are you feeling all right?" Amara's eyes widened slightly, and she looked away, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her backpack. I just wasn't that hungry, Daddy." "Really?" Malik said, his voice calm but firm. "You seemed pretty hungry last night at dinner. Are you sure there's nothing else going on?" Amara hesitated, biting her lip as she struggled to find the words. Malik could see the conflict in her eyes, the fear and uncertainty swirling just beneath the surface. Finally, she let out a small sigh, her shoulders sagging. "Mrs. Miller doesn't like it when we eat too much," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. Malik felt a surge of anger, but kept his tone gentle. "What do you mean, honey?" She said that eating too much makes us lazy. That we have to be an example for other kids. Amara's voice was filled with shame, her gaze fixed on her hands. "She told me I shouldn't finish my lunch, that I should set a better example." Malik's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. The image of Mrs. Miller standing over Amara, her piercing gaze filled with disapproval, flashed through his mind. His daughter, a 10-year-old with a bright, compassionate heart, was being made to feel guilty for something as basic as eating a full meal. "That's not right, Amara," Malik said softly. "You should never feel ashamed of eating when you're hungry. What Mrs. Miller said to you, it's not okay." Amara looked up, a glimmer of relief in her eyes. "Really?" "Absolutely," Malik assured her. "You're growing, and you need to eat to stay strong and healthy. I'm going to talk to your mother about this, and we're going to make sure you don't have to feel this way again." They drove home in silence, Amara visibly more relaxed, as if a weight had been lifted. But Malik's mind was far from at ease. This wasn't just a matter of an overzealous teacher. Mrs. Miller's behavior was affecting his daughter's self-worth, instilling ideas that could have lasting damage on her psyche. He knew he had to take action to protect Amara from further harm. That evening, after Amara had gone to bed, Malik sat down with Jasmine and recounted everything he'd witnessed and everything Amara had told him. Jasmine's face grew pale, her hands trembling with anger as she listened. She's shaming her for eating, for something so fundamental. Jasmine's voice cracked with emotion, a mixture of fury and heartbreak. "How dare she?" Malik nodded, his jaw clenched. "I don't know what Mrs. Miller's intentions are, but I'm not letting her hurt Amara. We need to confront the school administration. They need to know what's happening in her classroom." Jasmine agreed, her gaze steely with determination. "We chose this school because it was supposed to be a safe, supportive place for her. We're not letting one teacher ruin that." Together, they formulated a plan to address the issue, vowing to stand firm and protect their daughter. They would speak to the principal, demand an explanation, and ensure that Mrs. Miller was held accountable for her actions. Amara deserved a learning environment free from shame and fear, and they would do everything in their power to restore her trust in the school that had once felt like a haven. The next morning, armed with the truth and a fierce determination, Malik and Jasmine prepared for a meeting that would bring Mrs. Miller's actions into the light, hoping to end the harm that had already been done. The next morning, Malik and Jasmine dressed with a renewed sense of purpose. They had both taken the day off work to ensure they could address the situation with the school administration. The night before, they'd spoken at length, trying to come up with the best approach to confront BMF Elementary about Mrs. Miller's disturbing behavior. They were prepared to be calm, but resolute, polite, yet unwavering. They knew that Amara deserved a safe, nurturing learning environment, and they would stop at nothing to protect her. Malik had been up since dawn, pacing the living room, his mind racing with various scenarios of how the meeting might unfold. Jasmine, ever the pragmatic one, had taken the time to gather notes on what they planned to discuss. They wanted to be precise, sticking to the facts and avoiding any possibility of their concerns being brushed off as overprotective parenting. When Amara woke up that morning, Malik and Jasmine sat her down at the breakfast table, explaining that they would be visiting her school to talk to the principal. They reassured her that this was about making sure her school was a safe and supportive place for her, and that she hadn't done anything wrong. Amara seemed relieved, but there was a shadow of worry in her eyes. Malik could sense that she was still nervous about what might happen. "Will Mrs. Miller get mad at me?" she asked quietly, fidgeting with her spoon. "No, sweetheart," Jasmine said, kneeling beside her and taking her hand. "You did nothing wrong. If anyone should feel ashamed, it's Mrs. Miller, not you." Malik gave her a reassuring nod. "We're going to make sure she understands that treating you this way is not acceptable. You deserve to feel safe and happy at school, okay?" Amara nodded, giving them a small smile. She looked reassured but still quiet, her usual bubbly spirit dampened by the events of the previous day. After dropping Amara off, Malik and Jasmine went straight to the school's administration office. They requested an immediate meeting with Principal Garcia, a woman known for her no-nonsense attitude and commitment to student welfare. They had met her during parent orientation and had been impressed by her dedication to fostering an inclusive environment. The principal's office was spacious and well-organized, with shelves lined with books on educational philosophy and child psychology. Principal Garcia, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a bun, greeted them with a firm handshake and gestured for them to sit down. "Mr. and Mrs. Weston, thank you for coming in. I understand you have some concerns about Mrs. Miller," she asked, her tone professional but warm. Malik took a deep breath, collecting his thoughts. "Yes, Principal Garcia, we do. It's not easy for us to be here, but after what we witnessed and what Amara told us, we felt it was necessary." Jasmine leaned forward, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "We're here because we believe Mrs. Miller's behavior towards Amara is inappropriate and damaging. Amara came home from school yesterday visibly upset, and when we asked her about it, she was hesitant to tell us anything at first. But eventually, she shared that Mrs. Miller has been shaming her for something as simple as eating lunch." Principal Garcia's eyebrows furrowed slightly, a hint of surprise on her face. "Shaming her? Can you elaborate on what you mean by that?" Malik nodded, his jaw tightening as he recalled the events he'd witnessed. "Yesterday, I took a personal day to observe what was going on at the school. I watched from a distance as the kids were having lunch in the cafeteria, and I noticed Mrs. Miller hovering over Amara, making her feel guilty about eating. Amara told us that Mrs. Miller implied that finishing her meal would make her lazy and that she needed to set an example for others by not eating as much." Principal Garcia's expression turned grave. She took a moment, as if processing what she just heard, and then leaned back in her chair, her gaze shifting between Malik and Jasmine. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," she said finally. "This is certainly concerning, and I assure you that we take issues like this very seriously. Mrs. Miller has been with us for a few years, and there haven't been any formal complaints against her, but that doesn't mean we'll overlook this." Jasmine's voice trembled slightly as she continued. "We're worried that this could have a lasting impact on Amara. She's only 10 years old, and she's at a stage where she's building her self-image. To be made to feel shame over something as basic as eating could have long-term effects on her confidence and mental health." Principal Garcia nodded thoughtfully, jotting down notes. "I understand your concern, Mrs. Weston. Let me assure you that our top priority is the well-being of our students. If there's any truth to what you're saying, we'll address it with Mrs. Miller immediately. We'll start by reviewing her interactions with students and possibly conducting a formal observation." Malik, feeling a mix of relief and frustration, pressed further. "We don't want to seem unreasonable, but we've worked hard to give Amara a safe environment after everything she went through at her previous school. We chose BNF Elementary because of its reputation. This kind of behavior from a teacher is the last thing we expected here." Principal Garcia looked at them with a sympathetic expression. "I understand completely. I'll investigate this thoroughly, and if I find that Mrs. Miller has acted inappropriately, we will take the necessary steps to ensure it doesn't happen again." Jasmine looked at her, gratitude mixed with anxiety in her eyes. "We appreciate that, Principal Garcia. All we want is for Amara to feel safe and valued." The principal nodded, her expression sincere. "Of course, I'll keep you both updated on the progress of this investigation. In the meantime, please reassure Amara that she can come to us with any concerns, and if she feels uncomfortable around Mrs. Miller, we can arrange for her to speak with one of our counselors." Malik and Jasmine thanked her, feeling a sense of cautious optimism as they left the office. They walked to their car in silence, both absorbing the gravity of what they'd just set into motion. They knew this was only the beginning, and that it might take time for the school to address their concerns fully. Still, they felt reassured that they had done the right thing by advocating for their daughter. That evening, they decided to have a quiet, relaxed dinner at home, focusing on helping Amara feel comfortable and loved. Amara seemed to pick up on their lighter mood and shared bits of her day with them. Carefully avoiding any mention of Mrs. Miller, they let her leave the conversation, wanting her to feel like she was in control. They could see how much she needed the support and normalcy of family after the unsettling experiences at school. Over the next few days, Malik and Jasmine waited anxiously for updates from Principal Garcia. They noticed subtle changes in Amara's behavior each day. She seemed slightly more relaxed, as if she sensed something was being done to protect her. Still, there was a guardedness about her, a new reluctance to open up fully. Malik found himself growing more frustrated and impatient, hoping that the principal's investigation would yield some form of resolution soon. Finally, at the end of the week, they received a call from Principal Garcia, requesting another meeting. Malik and Jasmine could hardly contain their anticipation as they entered the principal's office once again, hoping for some closure. Principal Garcia greeted them, her expression more serious than before. "Thank you for coming in," she began, motioning for them to sit. "After reviewing Mrs. Miller's conduct and speaking with several students, I've found that your concerns are, unfortunately, valid." Jasmine's hand went to her mouth, her eyes brimming with tears. Malik felt a surge of vindication, mixed with sorrow for his daughter's experiences. The students reported similar issues to what Amara described. Principal Garcia continued. "It seems that Mrs. Miller has been employing subtle methods to control their behavior, particularly around food and other personal choices. While we cannot determine her motivations, her actions have created a toxic atmosphere for some of her students." Jasmine's voice shook. "What will happen now? Will she still be teaching Amara?" "No," Principal Garcia replied firmly. "We're placing Mrs. Miller on administrative leave while we conduct a full review. In the meantime, we'll ensure that Amara is assigned to a different class with a more supportive teacher. We'll also have our school counselor check in with her regularly to make sure she feels safe and supported." Malik felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "Thank you, Principal Garcia. I know this wasn't an easy decision, but we appreciate you taking our concerns seriously." Principal Garcia nodded. "Amara's well-being, and the well-being of all our students, is our priority. I can't apologize enough for the distress this has caused your family. We are committed to making BFF Elementary a place where every child feels valued and respected." As they left the office, Malik and Jasmine felt a mixture of relief and lingering sadness. They had achieved what they set out to do, protect their daughter from further harm. Yet they couldn't erase the pain and confusion that Amara had endured. They resolved to help her rebuild her confidence and self-worth, to remind her each day that she was loved and worthy. That evening, they sat with Amara, explaining that she would be moving to a new classroom. They didn't go into detail about the situation with Mrs. Miller, choosing instead to focus on the positive changes ahead. Amara's face lit up with relief, and for the first time in days, she seemed to fully relax, a genuine smile spreading across her face. As they hugged her goodnight, Malik and Jasmine shared a silent promise to one another. They would always be vigilant, always ready to protect their daughter from harm. In the end, they knew that standing up for Amara had been worth every difficult conversation, every sleepless night. Over the weekend, Malik and Jasmine focused on helping Amara decompress. They took her out to her favorite park, watched her climb trees and play on the swings, and listened as she talked about everything but school. The tension that had marked her demeanor seemed to lift gradually, and they could see glimpses of her usual lively self returning. Both parents felt a sense of relief, but they knew they had a long journey ahead to restore her confidence fully. On Monday, Amara started in her new classroom with Ms. Lopez, a teacher known for her kindness and interactive teaching style. Malik and Jasmine had met Ms. Lopez briefly after their meeting with Principal Garcia, and she had reassured them that she would be attentive to Amara's needs. They had left that conversation feeling hopeful that their daughter was finally in safe hands. That morning, as Malik dropped Amara off at school, he walked her to the classroom door and gave her an encouraging smile. "Have a great day, Princess. Ms. Lopez seems wonderful." Amara gave him a small but genuine smile. "Thanks, Daddy. I think I'm going to like this class." Malik watched her disappear into the room, noticing the warmth and openness of Ms. Lopez's demeanor as she welcomed Amara. The classroom was decorated with colorful posters, inspirational quotes, and drawings from students, an atmosphere that exuded positivity and creativity. Malik left with a lighter heart, grateful that his daughter was finally in a place where she could learn and thrive without fear. The first few days in Ms. Lopez's class were transformative for Amara. Unlike Mrs. Miller, who had enforced strict, unspoken rules around behavior and appearances, Ms. Lopez encouraged her students to express themselves and explore their interests. In Ms. Lopez's classroom, students were celebrated for who they were, not scolded for minor infractions or held to unrealistic standards. On her second day, Ms. Lopez introduced a class activity called Everyone's Unique, where each student was invited to share something special about themselves. Amara initially hesitated, feeling a pang of fear at the thought of speaking in front of the class. Memories of Mrs. Miller's cold gaze and judgmental comments lingered in her mind, making her anxious. But Ms. Lopez noticed her hesitation and walked over, kneeling down to meet her eyes. "Amara, would you like to share something special about yourself? You don't have to if you're not ready, but I think the class would love to hear from you." Amara looked around, seeing the kind, encouraging smiles on her classmates' faces. Slowly, she found herself opening up, sharing a story about her love for animals and how she wanted to become a veterinarian someday. As she spoke, the words flowed naturally, and she felt her anxiety melt away. When she finished, Ms. Lopez beamed at her. "Amara, that's wonderful. Your passion and kindness towards animals are truly inspiring. I can already tell that you're going to make a difference in this world." The entire class clapped, and for the first time in weeks, Amara felt seen. Not as a problem, not as someone who needed to be fixed or controlled, but as a person with unique dreams and strengths. Her cheeks flushed with pride, and a warmth spread through her heart. In that moment, she felt a deep sense of belonging, as if she had finally found her place. Meanwhile, Malik and Jasmine stayed in close contact with Principal Garcia, who updated them on the investigation into Mrs. Miller. It seemed that other parents had come forward with similar concerns, recounting instances where Mrs. Miller had subtly shamed or controlled their children. Some parents even shared stories about their children becoming self-conscious about their eating habits or feeling afraid to speak up in class. Principal Garcia assured them that the school was conducting a thorough review and that steps were being taken to prevent such behavior from happening again. Mrs. Miller's actions were under scrutiny, and it was likely that she would face consequences. Knowing that their actions had empowered other parents to speak up gave Malik and Jasmine a sense of accomplishment, reinforcing their belief that they had done the right thing for their daughter and for other children as well. In Ms. Lopez's class, Amara continued to blossom. Every day brought a new experience that built her confidence. Ms. Lopez noticed her talents in math and science and encouraged her to join the school's STEM club, where she could meet other students who shared her interests. Amara was initially nervous about joining a new group, but Ms. Lopez's gentle encouragement gave her the courage she needed to take the leap. The STEM club quickly became a place where Amara felt at home. She met other kids who loved science and engineering, and they worked on projects together, building simple robots and conducting experiments. The club's advisor, Mr. Patel, was a kind and patient teacher who encouraged curiosity and collaboration. Amara found herself looking forward to STEM club meetings, excited to learn new things and work with her peers. One afternoon, Mr. Patel introduced a project to build a small solar-powered vehicle. The students were divided into teams, and Amara was chosen to lead her group. She felt a flicker of anxiety, but she remembered Ms. Lopez's words about her leadership qualities and took a deep breath. This was her chance to step up, to believe in herself. As the team worked on the project, Amara guided them with a natural ease, helping her teammates troubleshoot problems and offering encouragement when they struggled. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and soon the entire team was cheering as their little solar vehicle zoomed across the table, powered solely by sunlight. When they presented their project at the school's STEM fair, Amara's parents attended, watching with pride as their daughter explained the mechanics of the vehicle to the crowd. She spoke with confidence, her face alight with excitement as she shared her newfound knowledge. Malik and Jasmine exchanged a tearful glance, realizing just how far their daughter had come in a short time. In that moment, they saw the real Amara, the bright, compassionate, driven girl they had always known, free from the shadows of self-doubt and shame that Mrs. Miller had cast. Amara's journey had not only helped her rediscover her strengths, but had also reinforced the values of resilience and courage in her family. That evening, as they gathered around the dinner table, Amara couldn't stop talking about the STEM fair and the positive feedback she'd received from teachers and parents alike. She proudly showed her parents the certificate she'd been awarded, and they celebrated with her, laughing and talking long into the night. After dinner, Amara pulled out a thank you card she'd made for Ms. Lopez. She had drawn a picture of the class with the words, "Thank you for believing in me," written in neat, careful handwriting. She asked her parents if they could deliver it to her teacher the next morning. "I'm proud of you, Amara," Malik said as he hugged her tightly. "You've been so brave, and you've shown us all how strong you are." Amara smiled, leaning into her father's embrace. "Thanks, Daddy. I feel happy again. I don't feel scared at school anymore. Ms. Lopez and Mr. Patel, they're really nice. They make me feel like I can do anything." Jasmine stroked her daughter's hair, her heart full. "And you can, sweetheart. We believe in you too. You're going to do amazing things." That night, Malik and Jasmine stayed up talking, reflecting on the journey they had been on as a family. They realized how important it was to remain vigilant, to listen and watch for the subtle signs that something was wrong, even when everything seemed fine on the surface. They had learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving, and that the world could still harbor those who used their authority to harm rather than uplift. But they had also seen the power of intervention, the strength of standing up for what was right. By taking action, they had protected their daughter, helping her reclaim her sense of self-worth and confidence. Amara had become a symbol of resilience, not just for herself, but for her parents as well. They knew that there would be more challenges ahead, as there always were in life. But now they felt more equipped to face them, knowing that they could count on each other, and that they would always fight for Amara's well-being. As the weeks went by, Amara continued to thrive under Ms. Lopez's care, excelling in her studies and building meaningful friendships with her classmates. She no longer seemed weighed down by insecurity or fear. Instead, she approached each day with an open heart and a curious mind, eager to learn and grow. At the end of the semester, Ms. Lopez awarded Amara the Shining Star Award for her leadership and dedication in the classroom. Amara accepted the certificate with a bright smile, her gaze scanning the audience until she found her parents. They waved, beaming with pride, their hearts swelling with gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment. Amara's experience had taught them all the importance of speaking up, of questioning when things didn't feel right, and of trusting their instincts. Together, they had faced down a dark chapter and emerged stronger, bound by a deeper understanding of love, resilience, and courage. As the months rolled on, Amara's progress continued to astonish Malik and Jasmine. She became increasingly involved in school activities, joined a reading club, and even began helping her classmates with their projects. Her confidence had blossomed, and it was as if she had shed the shadows that Mrs. Miller's influence had cast over her. Malik and Jasmine felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that their efforts to protect her had paid off. Yet they couldn't ignore the lingering impact that Mrs. Miller's behavior had had on their family. The experience had forced them to question their trust in institutions that claimed to protect children and had ignited a passion within them to ensure that other families didn't face similar situations. Jasmine, ever proactive, suggested an idea that had been brewing in her mind for weeks: creating a support group for parents within the school community. She wanted to establish a safe space where parents could share concerns, support one another, and discuss any issues their children might face. Malik, who was initially hesitant, quickly saw the potential impact of such a group. "I think it's a wonderful idea, Jas," Malik said one evening as they discussed her plan at the dinner table. "I mean, if we hadn't been vigilant, who knows how long Amara would have endured that treatment. If we can help other parents recognize the signs sooner, maybe they won't have to go through what we did." Jasmine nodded, her eyes sparkling with determination. "Exactly. It's not just about protecting our own kids. It's about building a stronger community that values every child's well-being. There's power in parents coming together. We can make sure that no one slips through the cracks." Amara, who was listening intently, piped up, "Can I help too, Mommy? Maybe I can talk to other kids and tell them to be brave, and tell their parents if something is wrong." Jasmine and Malik exchanged a warm glance, feeling both proud and moved by Amara's courage. Her willingness to turn her experience into something positive filled them with a renewed sense of purpose. "Of course, sweetheart," Jasmine replied, brushing a strand of hair from Amara's face. "Your voice is important too. Kids need to know that they're not alone, and that it's okay to speak up when something feels wrong." The following week, Jasmine took the first steps to turn her vision into a reality. She reached out to Principal Garcia, who had been extremely supportive throughout the investigation into Mrs. Miller, and shared her idea. Principal Garcia was enthusiastic, recognizing the value of a parent-led initiative that could foster a more transparent and connected school community. With the school's support, Jasmine organized the first meeting of the Parent Advocacy Circle in the school library one evening. She and Malik sent out invitations to all the parents, explaining the purpose of the group and inviting them to share any concerns or experiences they might have. To Jasmine's surprise and delight, the response was overwhelming. On the night of the meeting, dozens of parents showed up, filling the library with a buzz of conversation and anticipation. Jasmine felt a surge of pride and a little nervousness as she stepped forward to address the group. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I think it's safe to say that we're all here because we care deeply about our children's safety and happiness. Over the past few months, my family has gone through a challenging experience, and it's made us realize how important it is to have a space where we can come together, share, and support one another." As she spoke, she noticed parents nodding in agreement, some with sympathetic expressions, others looking resolute. She shared a brief overview of what had happened with Mrs. Miller, keeping details minimal to protect Amara's privacy. Then, she invited others to share any concerns or experiences they might have encountered, either with school staff or other aspects of their children's lives. At first, there was a silence, as if everyone was weighing their words carefully. Then, a mother near the back raised her hand. She introduced herself as Carla and began sharing the story about her son, who had been struggling with anxiety after being singled out in front of the class by a teacher. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but the relief on her face was evident. Other parents followed, sharing experiences that ranged from small grievances to more serious concerns about teachers or students. Malik and Jasmine listened, their hearts heavy yet inspired by the openness of the parents in the room. It was clear that many of them had been carrying these concerns alone, unsure of whether they were valid or if anyone would take them seriously. The meeting stretched on, parents bonding over shared struggles, offering advice, and expressing gratitude for the opportunity to be heard. By the end of the night, the Parent Advocacy Circle had laid the foundation for a new level of solidarity within the school community. Jasmine proposed that they meet monthly, with each session focusing on a specific theme. Whether it was fostering mental health, addressing bullying, or building positive relationships with teachers, the group unanimously agreed, and several parents volunteered to help organize future meetings. As they left the library that night, Malik and Jasmine felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. They had turned a painful experience into something constructive, creating a support network that would benefit countless families. In the weeks that followed, the Parent Advocacy Circle became an integral part of the BNF elementary community. Parents began to feel more empowered, and the school administration responded positively, implementing new training sessions for teachers on empathy and inclusivity. Principal Garcia, moved by the initiative's impact, even proposed setting up a student council for the younger grades, giving children a voice in shaping their school environment. Amara, too, played a role. She became an unofficial student ambassador of sorts, speaking to her classmates and encouraging them to come forward if they ever felt uncomfortable or mistreated. Her teachers noticed her blossoming leadership skills, and she quickly became a role model for her peers. Her confidence radiated, and the weight of her past experiences seemed to fade as she embraced her newfound sense of purpose. One afternoon during a STEM club meeting, Amara and her teammates were working on a new project, designing a prototype of a mini aqueduct system. Amara was leading the team, her voice filled with excitement as she guided her friends through the steps. As she explained the mechanics, she noticed a younger student, Timmy, watching from a distance, looking hesitant but curious. "Hey, Timmy, wanna help us?" she called out, flashing him an inviting smile. Timmy shuffled over, looking both excited and nervous. "Can I? I don't know much about water systems." "That's okay," Amara replied, her voice kind and encouraging. "We can teach you. It's all about teamwork, right?" The group welcomed Timmy into their project, and Amara patiently guided him through the process, explaining each step in a way that made him feel valued and capable. Seeing the shy boy's face light up with pride reminded her of her own journey, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the people who had stood by her. That evening, when she recounted the experience to her parents, Malik and Jasmine listened with pride, marveling at the transformation their daughter had undergone. Amara was no longer the timid girl who had endured Mrs. Miller's judgmental stares. She was a confident, compassionate leader who used her experiences to lift others up. One evening, as the family sat on the porch, enjoying a quiet moment together, Amara looked up at her parents with a thoughtful expression. "Mommy, Daddy," she began, "I'm glad that you stood up for me. I was really scared before, but now I feel like I can be myself. And I want to help other kids feel that way too." Jasmine's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out to hold Amara's hand. "Sweetheart, you're already helping others. You're strong and brave, and you're showing other kids that it's okay to speak up." Malik nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "We're so proud of you, Amara. You've taken what you went through and turned it into something positive. That's a special kind of strength." Amara smiled, leaning into her father's embrace, feeling a warmth that went beyond words. She knew that her family had her back, that they would always protect her and encourage her to grow. And in turn, she felt a new sense of responsibility, a desire to use her voice to make a difference, just as her parents had done for her. In the months that followed, the Parent Advocacy Circle continued to thrive, and BF Elementary became known as a model for inclusivity and parental involvement. The school's atmosphere transformed, with teachers and students alike feeling the effects of the supportive community that had grown from Malik and Jasmine's determination. Amara's journey became a story of resilience within the school, a quiet yet powerful reminder of the importance of standing up for oneself and for others. As she moved on to middle school, she carried with her the lessons her parents had taught her, that she was worthy, that her voice mattered, and that she could face any challenge with courage. For Malik and Jasmine, the experience had deepened their understanding of what it meant to be parents. They had learned that vigilance was essential, that silence in the face of injustice was never an option, and that sometimes the smallest actions could create the biggest changes. Their family had emerged from a difficult chapter, stronger and more united than ever. And together, they looked forward to the future, knowing that they had not only changed their daughter's life, but had also left an indelible mark on their community. Years passed, and Amara continued to grow into an inspiring young woman. By the time she reached high school, she had blossomed into a student leader, actively involved in various clubs and initiatives, carrying forward the lessons she'd learned from her family's experience at Biav Elementary. Her journey had transformed her from a timid child who once felt silenced and ashamed into a confident advocate for others. As a sophomore, Amara was elected president of the school's Diversity and Inclusion Council. Under her leadership, the council held workshops and events that fostered understanding among students of different backgrounds. She organized panel discussions on inclusivity and even invited guest speakers who talked about overcoming adversity. Her mission was clear. She wanted to make sure that no one would have to go through what she had experienced under Mrs. Miller's care. She wanted every student to feel valued, seen, and supported. Amara's reputation began to spread beyond her school. Teachers, parents, and students across the district recognized her as a young leader who championed empathy and resilience. Her parents, Malik and Jasmine, couldn't have been prouder. They saw their daughter growing into a beacon of hope for others, and they knew that everything they had gone through as a family had contributed to her strength and sense of purpose. One autumn evening, just as the leaves began to change color, Amara received an invitation to speak at a regional education conference. The event was themed around youth voices, shaping tomorrow's schools, and it aimed to give young leaders a platform to share their visions for a more inclusive and compassionate educational environment. Amara was elated and a little nervous. She had never spoken to such a large audience before, but she felt compelled to tell her story and use her voice to inspire change. That night, Amara sat down with Malik and Jasmine to discuss her speech. She wanted to make sure her words would resonate, not just with students but with educators, administrators, and parents as well. She knew that her story had the power to remind people of the importance of vigilance and compassion in schools. "I want to talk about what happened with Mrs. Miller," she said quietly, looking up at her parents with determined eyes. "I think people need to understand how much harm can come from a single person's actions and how much healing can come from standing up for what's right." Malik reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Sweetheart, your story is powerful, and your voice matters. If this is what you feel called to share, we support you completely." Jasmine nodded, her eyes shining with pride. "You've already made such a difference in our community, Amara. Sharing your story at the conference will give you the chance to inspire others far beyond our town. You can be the voice for kids who may feel they don't have one." Amara smiled, feeling the unwavering support of her parents. She spent the next few days drafting her speech, revising it again and again until she felt it was ready. She wanted every word to reflect not only her experiences, but the strength her parents had shown by standing up for her and the resilience that had carried her through. On the day of the conference, the auditorium buzzed with energy as hundreds of educators, parents, and students filled the seats. Amara stood backstage, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her note cards. She took a deep breath, reminding herself of why she was there. This wasn't just about telling her story, it was about making a difference. Finally, her name was announced, and the applause swelled as she stepped onto the stage. The lights were bright, and the sea of faces in front of her seemed endless. She glanced down at the front row, where Malik and Jasmine sat, smiling up at her with pride and encouragement. Their presence filled her with a quiet strength. Amara began her speech by introducing herself and sharing a little about her background. She spoke about her love for animals, her academic interests, and her dreams for the future. Then she took a deep breath and told the story of her experience with Mrs. Miller. "At first, I thought it was my fault," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I thought I was doing something wrong. I felt ashamed and started to doubt myself. It wasn't until my parents stepped in that I realized I didn't deserve to feel that way. No child deserves to feel that way." She paused, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. "My parents taught me that it's okay to speak up when something doesn't feel right, and they showed me the importance of advocating for myself and others. They didn't just protect me, they empowered me. And now, I want to use my voice to help others feel that same sense of empowerment." Amara went on to discuss the importance of creating safe, inclusive environments in schools, places where every child feels valued, regardless of their background or abilities. She urged the educators in the room to be vigilant, to look out for subtle signs of distress in their students, and to foster open communication with parents. "Teachers have the power to shape a child's self-worth," she said, looking out at the audience with conviction. "Your words and actions can build someone up or tear them down. I encourage you to choose compassion, to be the teacher who listens, who encourages, who believes in their students." By the time she finished her speech, the audience was silent, hanging on her every word. Amara took a final deep breath and looked out at the crowd. Then, one by one, people began to stand, applauding her with tears in their eyes. The applause swelled, filling the auditorium, and Amara felt a wave of gratitude and pride. She had spoken her truth, and it had resonated. Afterward, people approached her with words of thanks and admiration. Some shared their own stories of struggle, while others expressed their commitment to becoming more compassionate educators and advocates. Amara's heart swelled as she realized the impact of her words. She was no longer just a young girl who had overcome adversity. She was a catalyst for change, a voice for those who needed encouragement and hope. In the weeks that followed, Amara's speech gained recognition across the community and even beyond. Local newspapers published articles about her, and she received invitations to speak at schools and community events. Her story became a source of inspiration for others who wanted to make a difference. Meanwhile, Malik and Jasmine continued to support the Parent Advocacy Circle, which had grown into a robust network of parents committed to fostering a safe and inclusive environment for all students. The circle now included workshops, guest speakers, and resources on everything from mental health to recognizing the signs of bullying. The group had even developed partnerships with other schools in the district, spreading the impact of their work. One evening, as the family sat together reflecting on the journey they had been on, Amara shared her future plans with her parents. "Mom, Dad," she began, her voice filled with excitement, "I've been thinking a lot about what I want to do after high school. I think I want to study social work or psychology. I want to help kids who might be struggling, like I was. I want to be someone they can trust." Malik and Jasmine exchanged a proud glance, their hearts swelling with pride. "You'd be amazing at that, sweetheart," Malik said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've already touched so many lives. I can't imagine how much more good you'll do." Amara smiled, her gaze steady. "It's because of you. You taught me to stand up for myself and to help others do the same. I want to make a difference, just like you did for me." Years later, as Amara entered college, her passion for advocacy only grew. She took up internships with organizations that focused on children's rights, mental health, and social justice. She continued to speak at events, sharing her story and inspiring others to use their voices. Her work extended beyond her family and community, reaching people from different backgrounds and giving them hope and courage. One afternoon, she received a letter from a young girl named Sarah, who had heard Amara's story at a school assembly. The letter was filled with gratitude, explaining how Amara's words had given Sarah the strength to speak up about a difficult situation in her own life. As Amara read the letter, tears filled her eyes. She realized that her journey had come full circle. She was now the person she had once needed, a source of strength and empowerment for others. She called her parents to share the letter, and as she read it aloud, Malik and Jasmine listened in awe, their hearts filled with a sense of fulfillment they had never imagined. Their daughter had taken the lessons of her childhood and turned them into a lifelong mission to uplift others. The impact of Amara's story didn't end there. Her work inspired a new generation of students, parents, and educators to prioritize empathy and vigilance in schools. Through her speeches, advocacy, and compassionate heart, she created ripples of change that touched countless lives. Malik and Jasmine watched proudly as Amara continued to grow, knowing that they had not only raised a resilient and compassionate daughter, but had also created a legacy of empowerment and advocacy. Their family's journey from adversity to triumph had strengthened their bond and given them a purpose that extended far beyond themselves. In the end, Amara's story wasn't just one of overcoming obstacles. It was a testament to the power of love, resilience, and the courage to make a difference. And as she stepped into her future, Amara knew that she was never alone. She carried with her the strength of her family, the support of her community, and a deep, unshakable belief in the power of compassion to transform lives. The end.